In today's video, we're going to talk about settings for your Q90T, your QN90A, your QN85A, really any QLED from the last 2 or 3 years should be able to use these settings. Now these are 100% the best settings you can get on the internet right now. They're not, but I like them, so I wanted to share them with you guys, and hopefully it will help you out for those that are just using out of the box settings, because out of box settings definitely need a few tweaks before it gets looking top notch for game mode. If you don't like these settings, you can always just reset them. So without further ado, let's get into the settings and let's go behind the camera. Come with me. I don't know if that's gonna work. I have my contrast at 44 because there was a lot of clipping going on when it was at 50 with the settings that I was using. Now it's really important that you don't have things clip in HDR, so that's why I dropped the contrast to 44. I've found it to be a more pleasing image overall. Technically it is losing a little bit of brightness, but trust me, the brightness sacrifice that you are making here is going to result in better picture quality across the board. Now brightness, I keep it at 50. You can adjust it to whatever you want. Brightness is just going to be whatever you want to make it. Sharpness, I like to keep it at 0. You definitely probably want to stay on that range because otherwise some games can appear over sharpened at the default 10 setting. But if you feel like it's a little blurry sometimes, you could crank up the sharpness a little bit, but keep in mind that it is very sensitive. If you're trying to stick with the creator's intent, maybe these settings aren't going to be specifically for you. But for gaming, I find that the creator's intent isn't always the best thing anyway, so I kind of just like to tweak settings based on what I like. I personally like to use 0 contrast enhancer. I don't like contrast enhancer at all for HDR. The reason for this is because it does tend to blow out some of the highlights when you are putting contrast enhancer on at all with this new update. Now I don't know if that's going to be the case for other Samsung QLEDs, so you might want to try it out. If you like it, keep it, but personally I don't use it, and even before the update I didn't use it for HDR, but I do sometimes use it for SDR, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. I honestly do sometimes change settings on a game by game basis. Some of these games have HDR that is just mastered very poorly, and honestly some of it you can't even really call real HDR, so you're definitely going to have to make some adjustments with settings from game to game. In some cases you may think that these settings may be a little bit too blown out for your liking on certain games. A lot of times you could also think these settings are too dim in certain games. So definitely want to switch that up on a game by game basis. Now, if you're not looking to switch it up on a game by game basis, I do think that these settings will be able to get the job done most of the time. One thing you got to understand with Samsung TVs is that HGIG, if your TV is capable of HGIG, then you're really not getting the proper HGIG if you own a Samsung with HGIG. The reason for this is it's actually designed to turn off the dynamic tone mapping of your TV so that the HGIG can do all the tone mapping itself. But on a Samsung TV, this doesn't happen. You can't turn off the tone mapping at all. Even when HGIG is engaged, it is undefeatable and you can't do anything about it. So you're not going to be able to set up those HDR screens properly. So you have to rely on people trying to test out different settings for that to find the different results. I've tested 24 clicks, I've tested 14 clicks, and I've even tested 34 clicks. For the most part, and I'm going to show you this right here in this example, is there is not a huge difference because the TV will tone map your screen in your image regardless. And this is an HGIG game that I am trying out here, so I don't know exactly what's going on, but the images kind of speak for themselves in my opinion. I really hope that Samsung does fix the issue with HGIG and hopefully it will turn off tone mapping in the future, because this is definitely a hindrance to setting up HDR in your TV for your game system. It's really, really annoying. So please, Samsung, if you're listening, fix this if you know how to or if you can. Settings for SDR, they're a little bit different. For SDR, I use about 30. sometimes 40, depending on how I feel. But I typically play in a dark room. Right now it's got a lot of lighting because I'm filming videos, but for the most part, play in the dark, about 30 brightness. That's kind of just what I go with. Contrast I keep at about 44, just like I do on the Xbox. I find that to be a pretty good contrast level for these Samsung QLEDs in game mode. Sharpness, again, I put at 0. If you think the game is a little bit too blurry, maybe you'll crank up the sharpness, but I typically like to use 0. Color, you keep that at 25 as well, and tint, we don't touch that. Contrast enhancer, I personally use on low. If you use it on off, you'll notice that you lose some color saturation, and using it on low is not really blowing anything out. When you go to high, you can see the clouds start to get blown out, and you don't want that. Color tone is really your personal preference here. I like to use warm too. For my gamma, I like to use -3 on BT1886. Shadow detail I also have at -3. This is personal preference. This can change from game to game. I have mine set up for Zelda right now. That is why it is what it is. Color space is auto. For some SDR games, maybe you want native, get a little bit more color pop, though it is definitely more unrealistic and saturated. Though if you're gaming, do you really care about that? Sometimes I use auto, sometimes I use native. For this I use auto. I'll also note that I usually don't use dynamic black equalizer. You put it to 1 and you get a little bit more contrast in some of these areas. Game Motion Plus, I always have this on for SDR games. This is a 60 hertz games, but I turned the blur reduction up to 10, and now I got a very smooth feeling, almost like it feels 120 frames per second on a 60 hertz title, on a 60 frames per second title. 30 frames per second title and you want it to feel like 60, you put the blur at 0 and you throw the judder to 10. So Game Motion Plus, when you turn it on, you do lose a little bit of brightness, and it just seemed like that raised gamma look that you get in SDR normally gets taken down a notch. So if I'm on Game Motion Plus, maybe I'm not dropping the gamma as much because the gamma kind of drops already with Game Motion Plus. So maybe I'll have it at -1 or -2 instead of -3. What did you guys think? I appreciate you guys for watching this video. Make sure you hit the like button if you enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one.